All right, welcome to episode 7 of the Mind Soul Connection. My name is Jamie Blaustein. I'm your host and CEO of the Sylvia Braffman Mental Health Center. Of course, as always, here with Ben Braffman, the Chief Clinical Officer of Sylvia Braffman. How are you, Ben?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
It's great to be here.
I mean, thanks for having me.
Right.
I had a very distant uncle at a bar mitzvah once for my little brother. At the end of it, he said, "Thanks for coming." And I'm like, "No, thank you for coming."
Right.
And I realized that that's like a really good power play to, pretend like you're the host. So no, either way, we're 50-50 on this, and it's good to have you. And, if you are watching this, definitely like, share, comment, anything to promote the podcast would be truly appreciated and really help spread the word. So
I'm excited about today. This is good stuff.
Yeah. So today's interesting. We really wanted to get a little bit more creative, a little bit more hypothetical and outside the box here. And so actually that's the theme of the next couple episodes. Of course, we want to talk about your run-of-the-mill topics like, depression and career and family and clinical. But today's topic is, if you could cure 5 mental health diagnoses or illnesses, what would you cure, hypothetically? And so I'm really interested in your take on this, Ben, as a clinician who's helped, hundreds of thousands really of people throughout your career. You've really seen everything. And so, of course, if we could, we would cure all of them, I think. But I want to revisit that premise for a minute before we jump into your top 5. So, my first thought was, obviously, it's hard to choose 5. We want to cure all of them.
Right.
But is there a silver lining of mental illness? And is that even a true statement? What would we go ahead and do this? Now, my gut is that the good of curing these illnesses would outweigh the bad, right? But I'm just wondering, is that something that you would do if you could? Or is there some sort of silver lining or purpose served, or sort of beneficial byproduct of the fact that people have mental illness?
Well, if I could, I would. I certainly would love to have that option. However, there are millions of people out there that suffer from mental illness that are really talented and really geniuses and artists, and they thrive in their profession. And so, I could argue that their disorder, whatever it is, kind of propelled them into their career. Just one jumps off the page to me is Billy Joel, who is bipolar, and you could kind of tell, or at least I can, that his depression and mania drove a lot of his songs to a certain degree, and then I think he got more stable, and he started doing more classical music and stuff that that he's not really famous for, as he is for the Stranger and other things like that.
So my takeaway is, and of course, through my own experience and watching others get better, whether it's addiction or some sort of mental illness, there is certainly a set of attributes that come from going through hard times. We are forced to sort of recalibrate ourselves to life. And I think that can certainly become an asset. And I do honestly believe that as a result of what I've gone through with addiction and mental illness, I'm certainly better than I would have been if I never went through it at all. However, what you're saying is that, okay, that may be true in a lot of cases, but the bad outweighs the good. And so we're going to jump into this hypothetical.
I mean, just so I people that are recovered or recovering from their mental illnesses, I think they would say similar things, that at the end of the day, yeah, I was able to do all these creative things, but at the same time, I lost my family, I lost my career, I lost, like there's a lot of loss that goes along with it. So yeah, I don't think that anybody would want to suffer through these mental illnesses.
So before we get into your top 5, I just want to ask you, and I know we kind of operate a little bit differently. You are very much like a gut level guy. So when I say give me your top 5, like I know there's a calculus going on in your gut, not in your mind, about like, hey, based on my experience and based on what I've seen, it's these 5, right? Whereas me, I'm a little bit more methodical,
right?
And I think that's why we work really well together at Sylvia Braffman. So my first thought is not what are the 5, but it's what is the framework through which I'm coming up with this answer? Is it number of people affected? Is it the severity of if it is affected? Is it purely life and death? So I just want to know, like, am I accurate about that? Because I can talk about the framework all day.
Right. So my framework, my process, and you're right. My process was not initially based on percentages in the let's just focus on the United States, right? So my process was not just focused on percentage of mental illness. What's the most popular one? My process had to do with my relationship and my understanding and my experience with these mental illnesses. What I've seen, I've seen devastation of family, devastation of person. People losing their identity. That's how I got to it. Practical kind of stuff. And when I talk about it all, I can't hone in on every single mental illness within the topic of say the headline is schizophrenia. So that's a pretty broad stroke.
Sure.
Like I'll share later, but there's 5 different types of schizophrenia. So that's my experience. That's my process.
Yeah, and honestly, that's kind of what I'd envisioned when we decided to do this. I like hearing your experience. So, all right, you have a magic wand.
Yeah.
And you have the opportunity to cure one illness. What is the first illness that you're going to cure?
First one is schizophrenia.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So
walk me through why.
Yeah. So let me just break it down for you. So schizophrenia, devastating disease, and there's 5 categories of schizophrenia. It's paranoid schizophrenia, which is probably the most popular one, right? The layman sees that person talking to himself, sees things, hear things. They're psychotic, which a lot of people relate to violence, and they're just they're preoccupied with religion or whatever. Schizoaffective is basically 2 disorders converging together, which is you've got schizophrenia, right? So the breaking of the mind, and you've got this bipolar thing going on. So you can be schizophrenic and depressed, or schizophrenic and manic, or pretty close to it. So you have that combo, and then a third one is catatonic. Catatonic is exactly what catatonia is, which is you're just sitting in a seat and you have no sense of time or anything like that. In fact, if I lifted my arm, drop it down, that type of thing. Then there's disorganized schizophrenia, which is you're just simply you're all over the place. It's like a good example is like word salad, where your thoughts are so disorganized that you just don't make any sense. Yeah. You're not in reality. And then the last one, which is quote unquote the most mildest one, is residual schizophrenia. I haven't seen a lot of this one, but this is one that it's really just mild symptoms of you might hear things, see things with depression, lack of expression or lack of a scope of expression. And then here's the thing with residual schizophrenia that fascinates me, is that it can go into remission and not appear again, or it could come back. So it's sort of like the mini schizophrenia, if you will. But Here's the reason that I picked schizophrenia out of the gate. And again, going in line with, with the theme of, my own experience. So I have had to speak to hundreds of parents, and I've had to say to them that your son or daughter had a psychotic break, is schizophrenic, and that is a lifelong illness. And that to me is just gut wrenching, because it means that everything has changed. And it can be devastating. It can be devastating for the family, devastating for the individual. It changes the outcomes of what the person might have been able to do. And then, and the other thing that makes it so nasty is that it usually comes about, not always. I don't want to be stuck with, misrepresenting the stats, 18 to 25.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that has to do with brain chemistry development. Right. It has to do with environment. 18 to 25. If you think about when you were 18 to 25, or when I was, or anybody, what were we doing? Well, there's a lot of life stuff going on. We're moving out of our house. We're going to college. We're dating. We've lost friends. We're gaining friends. We're all of a sudden we started getting interested in stuff. Brain chemistry changes.
Yep. It's older in women, right? Typically,
is
that what you see?
Typically.
So I want to go into a little bit more of the reason why it's number one, because you said it's devastating, and it's sort of like, everything is different thereafter. But you see you talk about diagnosing, and that's a tough thing to do, and then to communicate that to the family. You also see a lot of misdiagnoses in this direction.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah, people come in and they say, I'm diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Lazy. I've seen people, I'm diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I've had families argue with me, my daughter's schizophrenic. No, they're not. I don't know why you're amped up on, pushing this diagnosis on people.
Right. I mean, I think people, just from a layman perspective, like people like comfort in knowing what it is, and a label is comforting in some ways, because at least it puts what you're dealing with in a box.
Yep.
So it's so devastating because why?
So you literally lose your mind. Like I would love, this is what I would love to do within it. This is what I'd really like to do, as opposed to the fantasy of, the magic wand. I'd like to inject people with schizophrenia just for a day and see how they experience their life. It would change the way in which we treat it, the research that, that's being done, to sit in your own body, and you're having these outer body experiences, or you're having voices that they're not fun voices. Yeah. They're telling you to kill somebody, telling you to hurt yourself, telling you God knows what. That's just devastating. It's just your life as you know it is completely changed. That is not to say, by the way, I don't want to be complete downer here. There are also millions of cases where people are living with schizophrenia right now, and this is why the stats are they're a little misleading, that are successful. Yeah. It's like anything else. Like so,
and we've seen that at Sylvia Beth.
We have, and compared to anything else, you can learn to live with voices in your head if you're properly educated, you have coping skills, and you're medicated. Yeah. And so it's just like anything else, like even addiction. You can have a craving, you can have the thought, you can have a very bad thought, overwhelming. It doesn't mean that you have to act on it. Sure. And it's the same thing with schizophrenia. Is that you could have these negative thoughts. It doesn't mean you have to act on it. So that's a key piece to this, because there is hope, and I've seen it. So people can survive with schizophrenia. It's just devastating. It's just devastating to a whole family.
Yeah. A lot of misunderstanding on that illness. Number two.
So number two, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna combine 2, 3, and the reason is that you can do either or, right?
I think I know where this
so
is
number
going.
2 is anxiety. I kind of want to hone in on OCD a little bit. And then number 3 is depression. You can flip those two. It could be 2 depression, 3 anxiety. That's the pick of the litter. That's that's everybody's favorite flavor. That's the mental illness that's popular.
Yeah.
And it's getting worse, not better. I mean, and to me, why I put anxiety second, if you had to ask me, is that it's more anxiety than depression, for sure. And so we have to do a better job recognizing the trials and stressors that these generations are dealing with. I read somewhere where a millennial, or whatever they're calling themselves now, they have the same anxiety or worse than people back in the Depression. Back when there was no food, there was no jobs. The anxiety is that they wake up and it's the same kind of thing.
So I'm really looking forward to our next podcast, which is going to be about some of the environment, because in terms of nature versus nurture, right? There's that must be responsible for that big generational shift. I mean, we haven't really evolved much since then. So I'm curious to dig into that next week.
Sure.
What I'm seeing, just quick sort of Google search, roughly 35% of folks will experience anxiety and some sort of clinical anxiety disorder throughout the course of their lives, and roughly 10% depression. Now we're talking clinical right now. So, stats are, it's art and science, right? So I'm sure you could tweak that.
Hey, let me summarize. Stats are like bikinis, right? They, they reveal a lot of things, but they keep the real important things hidden. You know what I mean? That's like stats,
That's what I always say.
So, right. Anyway,
but you do agree that anxiety a bit more widespread than depression?
I think so.
I mean,
I think so.
Almost, I don't know. I don't want to say this for sure, but I think that most people that I know in my life experience anxiety. How much of that is clinical? I don't know, maybe half and half. People are anxious these days. They really are.
Yeah. I mean, it's also situational. I mean, I don't want to, kind of like make this broad stroke again and say that if you have, ruminating thoughts, that now you have a diagnosis of anxiety. Like, it might be situational. Sure. It could be seasonal. It could, it could be just what they call an adjustment disorder. Mm-hmm. For example, I mentioned this before, but kid goes away to college. You don't know anybody. Yeah. He's going to have anxiety like that. So it doesn't mean he's an anxious person. It doesn't mean that he has a disorder. Remember that disorder, it implies that your life is unmanageable. Right, that you're chaotic, you're disorganized, you're not managing crises, and it's not a one-time thing. It's over a period of time. Call it 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
If you have anxiety or depressive symptoms for 3 to 6 months, you're probably sniffing a disorder of some type.
What's interesting, my experience is that back in the day when I was 10 plus years ago, a using drug addict. A lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, right? Over time, once I, was able to completely get clean and get better and have a spiritual experience, the depression completely went away. I do not struggle from depression today. I definitely struggle with anxiety. And I think I have like a light version of OCD. Mm-hmm. I mean, you would know.
A little bit more than light.
Yeah. Not like washing my hands 10 times before I leave the house, but
let me make a comment to that.
Yeah.
What you have, if I may, is you have
diagnosed me in front of the world.
Absolutely. So let me just hone in on OCD for a second. So you have the obsession, but you don't necessarily have the compulsion. You were able to arrest a lot of your compulsion, right? Through your spiritual work, through your recovery. But you do have the obsession. Just because somebody has one, it doesn't mean that it's less debilitating, because the mind, the mind goes and it's you just have these reoccurring thoughts over and over and over again. And then, somebody like yourself, you've been able to channel it through exercise, through work, through
It
interest.
has become performance enhancing in some ways, kind of related to the early part.
I was just going to say to you that it makes you you.
Yeah.
See, there's a part of this that, and this is my kind of thing about. I'm just going to mention it. I don't know how much of a deep dive you want to take, but it's really faith versus fear. Like, you have more faith today than you do fear, and it shows, right? It shows, and that's what you want to see. As a professional in the field, that's what I want to see. I want to see an individual have more faith that things are going to work out. More family having more faith, and the way that shows up is that the family unit, they become a united front. The individual uses his support system. That's how I didn't even get into medication yet, right?
Yeah.
But that's how you reduce the anxiety, the obsession.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that rookie clinicians and people will get misdiagnosed because they will say to themselves, well, Jamie just has the obsession. He doesn't have the compulsion. So he really doesn't have anxiety. It must be something else. No, not necessarily. Right. So that's something that I'm very sensitive to, and it's important to educate families and individuals on.
Yeah, there's so much gray area. It's for me, it comes in waves. So it'll be like 2 to 3 weeks on, a month or two off.
Yeah,
and it's always kind of there. But like you said, it's there's guardrails because of the spiritual work that I do.
That's right.
Because of a whole bunch of things, and it's just seemingly unrelated to what's happening in my life. It's very bizarre.
Yeah.
I'll be in a situation that is like objectively a very anxiety provoking situation, and I'm good.
Yeah.
And then there's nothing really going on. I mean, I could be on vacation and the anxiety will be there. So
it's our brain.
There's a lot of work to be done. But it's super interesting. And so, is it fair to say, just to summarize this anxiety, depression, that it's the prevalence of it that's driving it being 2 and 3 on your list?
Yes. Like I said, you have to address it. Like, if you as a professional, in the field, if you don't address it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's, that it's there for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to do, we have more to do.
Yeah. Number 4,
big one, addiction. And it's a controversy, right? And this is my clinical philosophy, which is why I wrote this down. Again, it's very personal to me. So people make the mistake right out of the gate that addiction is not a mental illness, that they're 2 separate camps. And that's just a bunch of BS to me. That's just talk. It's using $25 words to try to impress people with the disease of addiction versus mental illness. No, it's a mental illness. I don't care what addiction that you're talking about. And it's on my list for a reason. There are people right now in the United States that are suffering from addiction. That all different kinds of addiction, substance abuse, alcohol, gambling, sex, pornography, gaming, all of that stuff. And it is an epidemic, which is why, again, it's on my list. It affects children. It affects the elderly. It affects, people that are wealthy, people that are poor, like park bench to park place. Addiction does not matter, but we collectively, the behavioral health industry, has to get in line with the fact that this is a mental illness. Let me just finish. So addiction is trauma, right? I could use those words synonymously, right? Trauma versus addiction, same thing to me. And it has its foundation in obsessive compulsive disorder, right? So if we start treating the obsessive compulsive disorder, the anxiety associated with addiction, and we start treating it as a trauma, and sort of kind of unraveling, the problem, we'll have more success. Yeah. Whatever you choose to do, you'll have more success.
You could argue that addiction impacts. If one of the metrics you want to look at is impact on others,
Yeah.
very possible that's number one, I would think.
So here's addiction is just, it's just dressed up a little differently, right? Like anxiety, depression, even schizophrenia. It's kind of like mental illness turned inward.
Yeah.
Addiction is like mental illness turned outward.
Yeah.
And a good metaphor is, so imagine we're sitting in this room and a grenade comes and it blows up. Well, things are going to be pretty messy in here.
Yeah.
Pieces are going to be all over the place. And that's what addiction is.
Mm-hmm.
It's destruction of
tornado roaring through the lives of others.
That's the illness, right?
Yeah.
That's the disease. That's how you know, like, okay, so you have a son who's addicted. Let's call him, he's 20 years old. Now, mom is taking him to his drug dealer, and she says, yeah, at least I know where he's getting his drugs from. Okay. That's not right. Like that's you have now added a complete dysfunction and a cancer to your family system. Right. So it's very behavioral in nature.
Addiction is one of those things that, yes, there's an internal situation going on, but then as a result of the external whatever it provokes in terms of actions, it compounds the issue so much more. So, you have a problem and then you just keep digging and digging and digging until you get stopped, typically.
It's a virus. It's a virus, and it spreads, and it affects people that you don't even know. And that's why I classify it as a mental illness, because it does all those things.
So I'll say one more thing about that. So when we first started talking about maybe opening a treatment center together, I had a hard time wrapping my mind around the philosophy that you just articulated, mainly because for me, like, I was very lucky to have mentors that walked me through a spiritual process. And that's what did it for me. Like, I got better because of a spiritual solution. Now, there was a clinical aspect, there was a medical aspect, but I also was taught, and I believe this still today, that if you are an addict, there are three main components to what you have. Like, if I say I'm an addict, what does that mean? It means I have this thing, we call it an allergy, where I start and I cannot stop, right? Like, something in me, and I don't know if that's a gene, if that's a bundle of genes, if that's an enzyme thing, if it's a chemical imbalance. I've heard all these different theories. But something about the way that I'm wired means when I start, I go. Okay, then this mental obsession, I'm able to get stopped somehow. Maybe I go to your treatment center when I'm 21 years old,
right?
And I'm able to get stopped. And then some time passes, and I'm not physically addicted, but my mind brings me back to it. And that's the mental obsession. And then the third is a spiritual aspect. It's a whole. It's a feeling of being separate from. It's a feeling of we call it untreated addiction or untreated alcoholism. And a doctor might call it anxiety, depression. And so what I think I've come to realize is that we're actually kind of talking about the same thing, that you agree with everything that I just said. But what you take issue with is how it's characterized in the behavioral health landscape and how it's viewed.
Absolutely. And it's like separated. And I think that if people would appreciate the fact and respect the fact that it's a mental illness, and it has you're an addict because you suffered some trauma and you have some type of anxiety. Some of that anxiety you still have today. Those are facts. It's not like made up. It's not a theory.
Right.
But
there's a genetic component. Because trauma is not genetic.
100%, but it's not always genetic.
Right.
Not always genetic. It could be very behavioral and something that you learn, which we're going to get into later.
Sure.
But it's devastating. And I wish that more people would not lump it in some other category, but put it under the umbrella of behavioral health and treat it for what it really is. Really is. Not this sort of separate kind of thing. And look what it's done. It's created fear. Addicts generally don't like to deal with the mentally ill, and the mentally ill generally don't like to deal with addicts. So it's almost created this, this tension where there really shouldn't be any.
Yeah. All right. Bring us home. Number 5.
All right. So borderline personality disorder. I'm sure I got some cheers out there for that one. So borderline personality disorder, you asked me about my process. So it's a treatment killer. Borderlines they're special people. Very, very bright. So why is it called borderline? So borderline was taken from the fact that it shows symptoms of neurosis, which is anxiety, depression, mood disorder stuff, bipolar, right? And it shows symptoms of psychosis, which is the schizophrenia that we talked about, the paranoia, the hearing things, seeing things. In addition to that, it also it's on the razor's edge of you're having relationships, and your relationships are just volatile. They're just packed with negative energy, positive energy. I mean, it's all over it's wild. It's kind of like, imagine, when you're first dating someone, and it's like, you're just in lust, so imagine that energy. You feel that energy all the time, right? So volatile relationships, volatile family relationships, you don't know where you stand. People with borderline personality disorder, they view individuals sometimes as good and bad, and they have this endless list of what makes you good and what makes you bad. And believe me, the good, you're going to be bad. You're going to mess up at some point, right? So there's that. They have eating disorders. They cut themselves.
No, I know you're generalizing. I just want to say that. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Of course, it's not going to apply to everybody.
Not everybody. And again, one of these symptoms doesn't mean you're a borderline, right? And by the way, it's a misused diagnosis. I mean, it's like in treatment, I supervise these clinicians, and they go, I think that the client has reached their maximum potential of clinical value here at the treatment center. And you know what that means to me? That you're lazy and you don't want to deal with the patient because they're difficult. And then, then they throw the word out, well, they're a borderline. No. You know if they're a borderline. Yeah. Borderlines are very dynamic, very charismatic. They take over groups. They take over treatment centers. In fact, I don't mean to scare you, but borderlines make great CEOs. Oh. That's a fact. So medication is difficult to kind of like, what are we dealing with?
You have mood disorders, you have thought disorders.
Yeah.
It's a personality disorder, right?
It is a personality disorder.
Is a medication really treating the symptoms, or can you treat the core? Because it's embedded in your personality.
So not in the way that you're saying it.
With medication, of course.
Correct. With medication, yes, you can treat the symptoms, whether they're anxiety, depression, sadness, anger. A lot of borderlines, they go from 0 to 150, and in their anger, they do a lot of damage. They spend a lot of money, or they destroy property, or they destroy lives. So if you had the right medication combination that would reduce agitation, reduce depression, you can help. There's a ton of therapy out there now that is helping borderlines. That's allowing them to start to heal. I'll give you my clinical perception. It's simplistic. I just hope that if you have borderline personality disorder, you make it to 30. Research suggests that the older that you get, the symptoms become less and less and less. Not all the time, but that is generally speaking. Like, if you can, but good luck trying to get somebody to stop using drugs, stop having sex with everybody and everything, stop spending money, stop, just the addictive nature of it. I don't know if we mentioned this, but like they get addicted to the mania of it, the insanity of it, the control. And then I would be remiss if I didn't add this, and this is sad. A lot of times, borderline personality disorder, it's not chemical, it's environmental. It's from abuse, and I'm not talking about you got hit with a strap once in a while. I'm talking about you were raped, by a family member over and over and over again. You got the shit kicked out of you over and over and over again. You're basically, your foundation was shifted, right? Another thing about borderline personality disorder is if you move around a lot. There's a lot of borderline personality disorders within the military. Why? Because they move around a lot in the whole world. So we know that has something to do with it. So we know that having safety and consistency and this foundation helps arrest the borderline personality disorder.
One final question, and I want a brief answer here, because you could probably talk all day about this. Yeah. Diagnosis, the art of diagnosing, or the science of diagnosing. What is it? What percent art? What percent science?
Oh, I could go on and on. So I'll summarize and keep it simple. There's 4 areas that I look at: the physical well-being, the emotional well-being, mental well-being, the social well-being, and the spiritual well-being. So those are the 4 areas I look at. If I hone in on whatever information I have, via paperwork, and then if I interview the patient, I hone in on those 4 areas, and I'm able to potentially come up with a correct diagnosis. That's how I do it.
Classic clinical answer. So if you had to put a percentage on it,
yeah,
art, science, or can you not?
Wow. The first numbers that come to my head is 50-50.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. Well, look, my takeaway here is that nothing is a death sentence. And, we're talking about, because of the nature of the prompt, right? What would you cure? Which implies what are the worst? So we naturally have to talk about the negative effects, both to the person and to those around them in this conversation. But the undercurrent of this conversation was that there's a lot of solution out there, whether that's medication, whether that's clinical, whether that's spiritual work. And that's why we love doing what we do, because we get to dig into the solution. We are way more solution focused than problem focused. And so I'm very much looking forward to digging into some of that solution in the upcoming episodes. Once again, thank you for all of your really insightful clinical wisdom and experiential wisdom. So we are looking forward to seeing you all next week. Please comment and share the podcast. We're on YouTube. We've got the Mind Soul Connection page on Instagram. We'll certainly be blasting out these episodes, and very much looking forward to seeing you next time.
All right. Thank you.